Electronic Arts hasn't had a particularly good record with the Star Wars franchise. They acquired exclusive publishing rights to the IP years ago, and they haven't really done that much with it. They finally released a decent Star Wars game with Jedi Fallen Order, and Battlefront 2 did eventually get better after a tumultuous launch, but for the most part, many will agree that the Star Wars franchise should go to other developers, that EA should not continue to have exclusive publishing rights given how little they've done with it over the years and given how much they have botched their Star Wars game releases. So that brings us to today's story, where we're going to talk about a few more horror stories in regards to canceled projects and some of the mismanagement surrounding the Star Wars IP. Now, this latest story ties back to two other canceled projects that we previously heard about, starting with the Visceral Games project called Project Ragtag. You may recall that on October 2017, EA announced that they'd be shutting down Visceral Games and canceling Project Ragtag. This was a game that was spearheaded by the legendary Amy Hennig. It was supposed to be this Uncharted-style experience where you controlled a ragtag band of Star Wars characters, each with different gameplay styles, and it sounded like just something a little more out there, a little different. It didn't necessarily deal with lightsabers and Jedis. It explored a different sector of the Star Wars universe, and it was something that I think a lot of people would have loved to see fully fleshed out, but unfortunately, things didn't pan out on that front. Jason Schreier explained in this October 27th, 2017 article what went wrong. There was troubled development on top of EA wanting to meet certain financial guidance and wanting to create a game that was more monetizable, and that all culminated in the cancellation of Project Ragtag and the shutting down of Visceral Games, a company and a studio that EA deemed wasn't contributing much. And then after that, we learned that Project Ragtag was transferred over to EA Vancouver, and the game was essentially repurposed. There were some art assets that were transferred over, but the game began development from scratch essentially, and it shifted from this linear story-driven game to something more open world. And we learned on January 15th, 2019 from another Jason Schreier article that EA had canceled this open world Star Wars game. It reads right here, Project codenamed Ragtag was a linear action-adventure game directed by Uncharted director Amy Hennig. EA Vancouver had been assisting on the project, and when EA closed Visceral Games on October 17th, 2017, the Vancouver studio took it over. But it wouldn't be accurate to say that EA Vancouver Star Wars was the same game as Ragtag. When EA Vancouver took over, it rebooted this Star Wars project entirely, keeping some of the art assets but transforming it into an open world game. Now that project is canceled too. So that's strike two for EA when it comes to the series of projects that started with Visceral's Ragtag endeavor. This project, which was codenamed Orca, was very early in development but would involve playing as a scoundrel or bounty hunter who could explore various open world planets and work with different factions across the Star Wars universe. When EA's top decision makers looked at their roadmap for the next few years, they decided that they needed something earlier than the planned release date for Orca. So they canceled Orca in favor of a smaller scale Star Wars project that's now aimed for much sooner, likely late 2020. So this would be the second time that the Star Wars project that began as Ragtag would be canceled, axed, killed, and then repurposed for something else. And while back then we didn't know what this new project, smaller scale, aimed for late 2020 would be, we now know thanks to another report from Jason Schreier. So here's a tweet from February 21st, 2020 that reads, Scoop, last year EA canceled a Star Wars Battlefront spin-off called Viking, EA's third canceled Star Wars game since 2017. Ragtag Visceral was canceled for Orca, EA Vancouver, which was canceled for Viking, EA Vancouver, and Criterion. All three are now dead. So what started out as a linear single-player action-adventure game a la Uncharted became an open-world bounty hunter game that then became a Battlefront spin-off, and all three were canceled one after another because EA seemingly had no idea what they wanted to do with this project and just kept changing their minds, or just didn't have any concrete plans, and their need to meet financial guidance and certain quotas led them to kept shifting plans, and in the end they ended up getting nothing out of this. Further details can be found in this article, whose headline reads, "Sources: EA canceled a Star Wars Battlefront spin-off last year." The beginning paragraph states, "Last spring, Electronic Arts canceled a planned spin-off of its popular Star Wars Battlefront series, the third Star Wars game that the publisher has axed since 2017. This latest game, codenamed Viking, was originally envisioned for release in fall 2020 alongside the next generation of consoles. But once it became clear to EA's executives that the timeline was unrealistic, Viking was no more." This is not the first time we have heard of executives who set unrealistic timelines that results in developers working their asses off only to have their projects scrapped. So this is unfortunate, and it is definitely a problem with management. And then Jason Schreier kind of goes through what happened, how things started off in 2015 with Visceral Games' project Ragtag, and then in October 2017, Visceral was shut down, Ragtag was canceled. Ragtag's assets would end up with EA Vancouver, who started to work on the open-world Star Wars game named Orca, which was in development all the way up to 2018 until it was also canceled, and then that led to Project Viking, and that was supposed to come in 2020 alongside next-gen consoles. And the reason Orca was canceled in favor of this smaller scale project was because they wanted to rush this project and fill a financial gap in 2020. It reads right here, "Electronic Arts executives like to call it a financial hole that needed filling." And of course, if that's the mindset you go into with developing a video game, with kickstarting a project, then, you're just not going to get the results that you want if you don't give developers a reasonable amount of time and creative freedom to develop the game that they're passionate about, the thing that they're envisioning. And EA's constant indecision and their mismanagement and their constant focus on filling financial holes seems to have been what led to one cancellation after another, from Ragtag to Orca to Viking. It is unreal how mishandled Star Wars is under EA's umbrella. And then from there, Jason provides details about Viking, how it's a spin-off to the Star Wars Battlefront series with open-world elements. How would that work exactly? Would that be an add-on to Battlefront, or would it be kind of a spin-off single-player experience with Battlefront-like mechanics? Why would there be the need for two Battlefront-style games? Would they not compete against each other? I'm not sure about what the plans were for this Battlefront spin-off, and there weren't a lot of details provided, but it seems like a strange project to me, one that didn't really need to be made. It feels like that open-world bounty hunter game or that Ragtag project sounded like far more compelling propositions. And then the article continues with how Criterion eventually got involved. You may know them for developing games like Burnout and Need for Speed. And then as far as details regarding development goes, here is what the article says. EA Vancouver spent some time designing ideas and prototypes for Viking, and Criterion came aboard soon afterward. That was when the problem started. Although Criterion was on paper the lead studio, the logistical challenges of cross-country game development made that a difficult proposition. As one person involved with the game said, "Too many cooks" was a running theme. Criterion leads had an ambitious vision for the game, aiming to put a strong focus on story and characters. Alright, so I guess that's the concept for the game, a Battlefront game with an emphasis on story and character, so it sounds like it could be single-player focused, given Battlefront 2 is multiplayer focused. Would that have been sold as a separate individual release, or would it be released as like a DLC for Battlefront 2? Would those two games tie into each other, or would they be treated as separate products? Hard to say for sure, but yeah, story and character-driven Battlefront-style game. Too many cooks seems to be a running theme not just for this game, but across botched EA titles. Anthem had that problem where there was just a lack of competent management, a lot of indecision, a lack of a singular vision, and that also seems to be what afflicted Viking and led to development problems that led to the game stalling, and eventually EA deciding that, well, this game's just not going to make it on time to fill that financial gap, so let's just throw it out the window. And that's just incredibly unfortunate that this keeps happening. EA needs to manage their studios better and find people who will be the top dog and the ultimate decision makers who have a strong vision. And lacking that, Viking just kind of fell apart due to too many cooks. Without one person saying, all right, everyone shut up. Here's what we're gonna do. Here's what we're going for. This is the road that we're taking. Done. Which brings us to this scenario. It soon became clear that Viking would never be finished in just a year and a half, which seems like a pretty unrealistic timeline, and I get the sense that even if this game would have been finished, maybe it wouldn't be the most fleshed out thing. Maybe it would have had issues at launch. Maybe it would have felt like a rushed game. And EA's executives had no interest in extending the timeline. Viking was cancelled in the first half of 2019, although this news has gone unreported until now. That fall 2020 financial hole will go unfulfilled. This is the foible and irony of this kind of let's fill the financial hole mindset. In the end, EA got nothing out of this. One has to wonder what would have happened if EA had let Project Ragtag run its course despite its troubled development, if EA would have supported them through the rough times. At the very least, then EA would have gotten something out of their investment. They wouldn't have wasted all this time and money, and who knows, Project Ragtag may have gone on to be a huge success, made EA a profit, and kickstarted a whole new series of games, maybe. I don't know. I guess hindsight is 2020, but with a company like EA, this is just so unfortunate and so common to lead by a financial mindset rather than a creatively empowering mindset, and the long-term effect is this. Companies like EA are just so short-sighted. They only see what's in front of them, the money that they can make in the next year, looking down at their feet rather than at the road ahead. As for what's happened to Criterion and EA Vancouver since the cancellation of Project Viking, well, Criterion is now back on Need for Speed, and EA Vancouver's helping out with Anthem 2.0 and Apex Legends, as well as EA's various sports games. So this series of Star Wars game that began with Ragtag is now officially dead, whereas before we kept seeing this project being moved around from one studio to another, being repurposed from one concept to the next. Now we know that this endeavor has officially concluded and been killed off with the cancellation of Viking. That's not to say that EA doesn't have more Star Wars games down the pipeline. It was noted by Jason right here that EA has 2 new Star Wars games in development, a sequel to Jedi Fallen Order at Respawn, and a smaller, more unusual project at EA Motive in Montreal, Canada. So I'm definitely excited about the sequel to Jedi Fallen Order, but it is heartbreaking to think about how much time, resources, and concepts were wasted under EA's management. How many Star Wars games could have been throughout the course of all this time that has passed since their acquisition of exclusive publishing rights? What other studios could have done with Star Wars in all this time? Just to think about what could have been if EA didn't mismanage Star Wars to this extent. We could have gotten far more than just Jedi Fallen Order. We could have gotten so many other cool projects. Disney, it is seriously time to reconsider your contract with Electronic Arts. It is time to consider spreading the Star Wars love out to other game studios and creative forces who would do Star Wars justice, who would create these incredible games with all kinds of interesting concepts that would really revitalize the video game scene for the ever-popular Star Wars IP, because right now things are moving too slowly with EA because of their mismanagement and their financially driven mindset, and it's taking too long to finally get to a point where EA releases at least one good Star Wars game. It took too long to get to a point where we finally got Jedi Fallen Order. It took just too many botched launches with Battlefront and Battlefront 2. It's time to just diversify. Let others have a go at it. It's time to acknowledge that maybe this exclusivity deal with EA is not what is best for the Star Wars scene. Anyway, I digress. This is where we're at with EA's Star Wars games. There's still some more stuff looming on the horizon, but there's also plenty of cancellations and plenty of cool concepts that never saw light. Plenty of mismanagement going on behind the scenes with the IP. And it's just a damn shame. This is one man's take on this report from Jason Schreier. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the current state of Star Wars video games and what your hopes and dreams are, who you'd like to see Disney outsource Star Wars to to create an awesome new Star Wars game. Drop a comment below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out!